For nearly a quarter century, an important part of Delmarva history was left unattended until it was practically buried under brush and bramble.
Yeah, at one time, the waters of Linchester Mill Pond in Caroline County kept the paddle wheel of the mill turning, thus providing grain for merchants near and far. Then, in 2003, the Historical Society restored the mill to its original state.
And it wasn't easy, but when they finished, they knew they had brought back to life a Delmarva treasure.
The Linchester Mill may be America's oldest continuously operated business enterprise.
Nearly 50 years ago, CBS's Charles Kuralt introduced the world to a Delmarva treasure.
There can't be a 300-year-old grist mill in mid-20th century America with a miller who opens the sluice gate to set his wheel turning.
At the time, it was one of the last working water-powered mills in America, run by America's oldest miller.
What's going to happen to this mill when you're not able to run it anymore?
She'll be tore down. Tore down again, like a lot of others.
Jock Walsh, president of the Caroline County Historical Society, says Mr. Langrel did retire.
In 1974, the miller hangs up his hat, which is still on a nail in there, puts his tobacco on the ledge, walks by his 1947 GMC truck, which we have, and goes up to the house and never comes back.
But the mill was never torn down. Walsh estimates that it was built in 1827.
How do we know that? When we do a project, we bring in a team of experts. We bring in a land historian, an architectural historian, a mill expert, a dendrochronologist, a paint analyst. The dendrochronologist in this case was really important. That's someone who drills into the structural components and can tell by the tree rings when the timber was cut.
Tucked away on the upper reaches of Hunting Creek, Linchester Mill was a powerhouse at the end of what's called the grain boom.
Caroline County is unique in that we're one of just a handful of counties in the United States that never had a second industry apart from commercial agriculture for over 300, in this case 350 years.
At that time, Walsh says there were about 25 flour mills in the area.
The farmers would bring in their grains, the miller would grind it up into flour. Sometimes they'd sell it to him, sometimes they'd sell it to a local merchant.
Linchester Mill was once described as a treasure of America because it includes what's known as the Oliver Evans technology, or the automated mill, developed right here in Caroline County. Linchester Mill docent Charles Andrew explains the technology.
So he came up with 3 inventions that revolutionized the milling industry. First, he said, the millers store the grain down below and they have to bring it up. So what does he invent? The very first elevator. Okay, which is just a tin cup on a leather belt.
Once the grain was up, it was brought back down through chutes. Grain was transported from one side of the mill to another with a conveyor. Inside the conveyor was an auger.
Depends on how he wanted it to go, either turn left or right, is how he would set this auger into that conveyor box.
All of this equipment was powered by a water wheel seen in this picture on the side of the mill. But a bigger water wheel had to be installed when the mill upgraded to a roller mill technology.
And unlike the previous Oliver Evans operation that still relied on 2 great big stones grinding the grain up, these are steel machines that press down. They don't cut the grain open, they press down and they pop it open, which is much more efficient and allows for much greater production.
What we're looking at here is the Fritz water wheel. Mr. Langrel, when he had the steel cut roller mills inside, he found that he needed some more water power. So he put this wheel in 1917.
5 years after Mr. Langrel decided to hang up his hat, the mill pond dam broke and Linchester Mill could no longer operate and was abandoned.
It was basically abandoned and neglected, and it was in absolutely terrible condition. We came down in 2003 and negotiated with the descendants of the miller's daughter, and were able to purchase the building.
Restoration of the mill was a pretty hefty undertaking that started with digging through the years of brush and weather. What they found was buried treasure.
All of the milling equipment, including the small hand equipment, was still inside this mill. Some of it had been taken, but most of it was still buried under mulch as the building had sort of deteriorated and the windows left open.
Today, the mill is open for tours led by Charles. Visitors can also trek out behind the mill, where they'll find a historic crossing point where Native Americans traversed while traveling the Choptank Indian Trail.
Then, in the 1850s, it's enslaved people who are escaping north, crossing here in order to go west about 1.5 miles or 2 miles to get to the Underground Railroad station that's being operated by Harriet Tubman and her parents, Ben and Rick Ross.
There's even old train tracks once used to transport travelers to Ocean City on the first Trans-Peninsula Railroad.
Looking at it all, the mill wheel and the mill stream and the mill, you get the feeling that when this all goes, we'll be poorer as a nation. Fortunately,
Charles Corral was wrong. The Linchester Mill still stands strong, so all can see what a Delmarva treasure it was then and now. Jock says many old-timers in the area have told the story of how the Linchester Mill provided grain for George Washington's army. Jock says that's simply not true. The mill doesn't date back quite that far.
That's funny. I love how the old miller just literally just hung it up and left.
And he left and never went back.
That's pretty cool. Hey, now don't go anywhere. Delmarva Life will be back in just a few minutes.